Welcome to this session on toxics, it's called. I'm Kirk Smith, here on the faculty of the School of Public Health here at Berkeley, and you'll hear about a project I did with U.S. and Mongolian colleagues on air pollution. And also have two actual close colleagues of mine, Larry Dale, who will be speaking also on air pollution issues, and Pujay, who will be talking about lead today, right? So although he worked with us on this air pollution project. So you have introductions of all of us in your material, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing us. So, I mean, this is one of the more difficult tasks in life of being chairing of your own, speech. But so I'm going to ask Pujay to wave these things at me, and 20 minutes is what we're shooting for. This crowd doesn't need to see one of these, but many crowds do. And it does relate a lot to a lot of the issues that we have been talking about in this meeting. Certainly relates to ours in terms of air pollution, because just sort of a bottom line here, the assessment we did for the Ministry of Environment is unique in the world as far as we know, certainly at the time. I don't know of any others since, where we didn't look at pollution outdoors or indoors or any particular place. We looked at pollution as it affected people. And when you think about it, it's a rather strange idea to try to measure and control air pollution from a health perspective anyway, measuring on the top of buildings, because I doubt if any of you spend much time on the top of buildings, and where you're breathing. The nearest monitor to us in this room is down in Oakland and hardly represents at all what's happening in this room. So. But it's not so easy, actually, to do an assessment based on what people are actually breathing, what we call in our field exposure assessment. But we tried to do so here, and it reveals some interesting things. And Ulan Bator is a great place to do it because, as you know, there are pollution sources of both modern and traditional kinds. The traditional kind coming from the Gers, the heating of the Gers, and the modern types, the usual types of power plants and vehicles and so forth. Okay. So this assessment was a truly collaborative effort. Joint PIs from the Health Sciences University of Mongolia and myself. Team members included Drew Hill, who is also here somewhere, doctoral student with us. He's the one who had to tramp out around in the Gers districts in the winter at -30. Instruments don't work so well at that temperature, but graduate students have some issues too. The team at the Health Sciences University, including Yuma, who gave a presentation this morning, is also in the room here. There she is. And a couple of colleagues, specialties, Rufus Edwards, who's Irvine, who's a specialist in measuring emissions from different things, and Jay Turner, who's an outdoor air pollution modeler. We've seen various versions of this. This is the Mongolia of not so long ago. A little bit of smoke coming from a couple of Gers out in the middle of nowhere. Who cares? But this is the Mongolia of today, at least half of it, and growing. And this is the pollution we get today because of having all those Gers in one place. It's the coldest capital city in the world, as you know, and it heats with coal in a valley. It's constrained on three sides. With air inversions, that means the pollution doesn't mix vertically in the winter, and so in the winter you get some of the worst outdoor air pollution in the world. It's not the average over the year; it's not the worst in the world, but in the winter it probably is. The background of the project is that, I said this, obviously growing concern, the public and media and policymakers, due to considerable extents due to coal in the residential sector. But there are other sources play a role, including the standard ones. Although there are other reasons to be concerned about air pollution, of course, the main concern and how the standards are set and so forth is related to health, so this is a health assessment. The rationale is that there need to eventually reduce emissions across the board. Of course, you want to control all pollution everywhere all the time, but you can't do that immediately. You don't have the funding or sometimes the knowledge to do that. So what do you focus on first? How do you get the most benefit in the next period of time with the resources that are likely to be at hand? So we wanted to provide better evidence of the different kinds of strategies for control in the city. What health benefits could be expected from cleaner household stoves and fuels and associated emissions reductions in other sectors? We chose a 10-year time frame, and we did this in 2014, so this is up to 2024. First, we have to look at the background health conditions. The air pollution acts as a risk on background conditions. So if you have a changing background health situation, there'll be a changing impact of air pollution. Now, that some people don't realize that. It acts on the background conditions. And then what did we use as the baseline, the scenario? Well, there were some things that had been done by 2013, including the introduction of so-called improved coal stoves in much of the city. And so we took those as the baseline. We didn't call it that. We called it T13, just in the trends as of 2013. And we took ambitious and very ambitious scenarios for the other two things we examined. Moderately accelerated improvement, including full deployment of the cleanest coal stoves then known. And then scenario 2, maximum rate of improvement with eliminating coal use in households using a clean fuel. Innovations, I mentioned the exposure assessment. Pollution affects health no matter where people are, but just when they breathe it. So you have to actually measure or estimate where the people are, not where the pollution is. We assess total exposure of the population over 10 years. Indoor and outdoor, of course, people spend time in and out, indoor and outdoor. That's why it's important, not because it's indoors or outdoors, but because people spend part of their day in each places. And we distinguish the exposure separately for young children, since they have special sensitivities. So just two groups, young children and adults. Not all sources are equally important. You can have some sources, because of this exposure approach, you can have some sources that produce a lot of pollution, but not much health effect, because they're not near people. Or, in this striking picture, here you can see pollution in the winter. The power plants are pushing the pollution above the inversion layer. They're not mixing down at ground level. So although they're producing a lot of pollution, they are not contributing much to exposure. What's causing the stuff down near the ground? Well, it's these things, or the smoke, the chimneys coming out of them. So we have to estimate the effect of indoor and outdoor sources of pollution throughout the year. So in the winter, you got very heavy outdoor pollution. It penetrates the Gers where people are sleeping. But also, the Gers are producing pollution inside as well as through their chimneys, because these coal stoves leak pollution into the indoor space. So they actually contribute to the outdoor, and they certainly contribute to the outdoor through their chimneys. Unfortunately, this particular one doesn't show a chimney. So how much outdoor goes indoors? Doing this by household type. Of course, and we chose the three major household types that are recognized in the city. And the count of the time based on some surveys, the time spent of the population in each location and in each household type. Let's see, we chose PM 2.5 as the small particles, small enough to go into the deep lung. These are the standard ones used for health assessments. There are other pollutants, of course, but these are the ones we know most about in terms of health. They're the same metrics used, for example, for cigarette smoke or secondhand cigarette smoke, small particles. So one characteristic of this kind of study is that we could not ignore secondhand tobacco smoke, because that adds pollution inside the houses and adds partly to exposure. And just to give you a little revelation of the bottom line, as in our most ambitious scenario, by 2024, unless something is done to change it, secondhand tobacco smoke will be the chief cause of exposure in the city. Now we assume that all public places are controlled. This is smoking inside houses. So a campaign to reduce that, to change the social context of smoking so people don't smoke next to their wives and babies, or, is definitely something that is required from a health standpoint. As I say, we think it was the first one to use a total exposure approach. Now, what diseases are caused by air pollution? You'll hear all sorts of things, but like in other big scientific fields, we have major international assessments where groups of scientists have gotten together and reviewed the literature, and it's gone through peer review, and they've decided where there is actually enough evidence and where we don't yet quite have enough evidence to count as an impact of air pollution. The agreed upon diseases are these: chronic obstructive lung disease, 2 kinds of cardiovascular disease. This is the standard type of heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, and acute lower respiratory infections, but only in children. Most of that is pneumonia. Sometimes we just call it pneumonia, but the correct term is this. Now, there's evidence about a whole range of other things from air pollution: tuberculosis, low birth weight, cognitive effects, other cancers, cataracts, stillbirths, and so forth. But those are, if you will, below the line in the international assessments. The feeling is that we don't have sufficient evidence to push them forward. Now, we're learning a lot more about these. I think even now we might add two or three of these to this list, but we have to wait for the next international assessment. So the other thing we did is use the so-called integrated exposure response curves. Now, we have evidence on the health effects of air pollution, not just from outdoor air pollution studies, but from household air pollution studies, the kind that me and my team does around the world, where you're looking at the smoke from cooking fires and how that affects people's health. Secondhand tobacco studies, usually where a spouse is exposed to their spouse's smoke, or a child to their parents' smoke, and active smoking studies. What do you think kills you in tobacco smoke? It's small particles, what the tobacco people call tar, total aerosol residual. It's the same stuff. It's the best single metric for combustion mixtures. So you have actually a lot of evidence at different levels of exposure: lower levels at outdoor air pollution studies, somewhat higher levels for secondhand smoke studies inside buildings, inside houses, higher levels still for villages in India and China where people are cooking with open fires in their house, and the very high levels of active smoke. But it's a monotonic increase in risk, increasing with exposure, as I'll show you. So this is what was used and developed in the new burden of disease assessment that I mentioned, and that's how we applied these in this study. So these studies, the curves I'm going to show you look nice and clean and smooth, but they are actually based on dozens of health effects studies that have been put together and modeled. I haven't put in the uncertainty bounds. They have considerable uncertainty bounds. You might be dismayed by the uncertainty bounds. On the other hand, I think you should be given some, little bit of confidence, because, it covers such a wide range of different kinds of studies and different kinds of places and different sources of pollution. Okay, skip that. So here are the IERs for the 5 diseases I mentioned. And here is pneumonia. So it says that the average annual air pollution level goes up. Here's particles. This is the relative risk, the extra pneumonia, if you will, compared to having no air pollution. Somebody living at 100 micrograms per cubic meter have 2.2 times more pneumonia, and so forth. And you notice they're different from one another, as you might expect. They're different diseases. Some rise slowly, like lung cancer. Others rise quickly, but then flatten out. They kind of saturate. And particularly stroke and ischemic heart disease saturate. So what is the implication for policy in a place like in a dirty city, for example, or a dirty household? If you're at 300 micrograms and you have an effort to go to 200, go from here to there, there's almost no difference in stroke risk. Same with heart disease. Almost the same with pneumonia. You've got to get down here. You've got to get down to this region for all of these things to really get a health benefit. And then this has substantial implications for policy. It means that measures that give you 50% reduction might make visibility a little better, but they're not going to improve much for health, except for lung cancer. Lung cancer is more linear. You'll get a benefit no matter what you do. Any reduction will give you a. So this is one of the reasons our assessment shows that you really need to get clean if they're going to reduce the health impacts from this pollution. So we tried to use local sources of information, not extrapolate from London or somewhere. That meant doing some measurements that Drew was involved in and Rufus, using local health information and information about this so-called improved coal stove. As I say, we did our own measurements, and the new modeling was done by Jay based on local information, meteorological information, measurements, emission factors, and so on. So there are dozens of air pollutants known to cause ill health in some fashion, but as I mentioned, we focused on PM2.5, which is the one we know most about. And of course, if you reduce PM2.5 by cleaner fuels or things to filters or something, you will also reduce many of those other pollutants also. So what is meant by a health effect? It's not straightforward to compare health effects across disease types and population groups. Typically, mortality is used, how many deaths are caused by air pollution. But the death of a child is a very different thing than the death of an adult. An 88-year-old dying and an 8-year-old dying is not the same thing. It looks the same on the death certificate. So the international health community has recognized this and has come up with metrics that take into account the lost life years. So the 8-year-old's lost life is a lot bigger than the 88-year-old's. It doesn't mean you don't count the 88-year-olds, you just don't count it as many lost life years as the 8-year-old. The metric is called the DALYs, Disability Adjusted Life Year. Glad to answer questions about it later. So where we report impacts in both premature deaths and DALYs. I say premature deaths because I'm sorry if this is the first place you hear it, but everybody has to die. So you just die sometime, but you'd rather die later than earlier. So if you want to know what's happening in Mongolia, this is the burden of disease in Mongolia. This is the rank of DALYs at the 1990, and as they were in 2013. You can see that lower respiratory infections, mainly in children, when we were number 1, they're now number 3. And ischemic heart disease has gone from number 5 to number 1, and stroke has gone to number 2. These are all related to air pollution. Doesn't mean they're all caused by air pollution. There are other risk factors, certainly, but it's these are the major outcomes of air pollution. On the other hand, lung cancer is not even on this top 15. It's down here somewhere. Here's liver cancer. COPD is not even on the top 15. So not all air pollution diseases are heavily represented in Mongolia. If you want to look at deaths, this is the distribution of deaths in Mongolia in 2013. On one of these, I can't remember what you call these kinds of projections. Here's the ones from heart disease. Here's the ones from stroke. Here's lung cancer. Here's COPD, here's lower respiratory infections. So these air pollution-related diseases are important in Mongolia. But of course, there are other things that are important too, including road traffic accidents and so forth. So primary results, outdoor air pollution, population exposures, health impacts. So here's the modeling for the outdoor air pollution. I'm not going to go into detail, but we did look at it specifically for the city using a grid approach and reasonably modern techniques for modeling this kind of pollution. So here's what it looked like in the baseline and the pollution levels. Here is what it would look like without doing anything else in 2024, and here's what the modest scenario of improvement did by 2024, improved things quite a bit. Here is the population wintertime outdoor PM2.5 associated with that. So here is the baseline. It averaged about 140 or so. Here is 2024, if nothing is done, it wanders up a bit, but improve things quite a bit if you can bring it down, if you do those interventions. Now, I know you don't keep these numbers in your head. What is 50, 100, and so forth? I think on the next slide, well, I'll show a slide, but in any case, the WHO recommended the level is 10 for your information. In Berkeley, we're about 11. So here's the population average annual outdoor air pollution. You can see if you do nothing, it goes up. If you do one thing, it goes down. If you do even more, it goes down even further. This report is available on my website, which I'll refer to at the end if you're interested in the details. So here, WHO air quality guidelines recommend 10. US standards are 12, China 35 and 40. No country actually has set its standards as low as the WHO thinks you should. Perhaps China might be the closest to Mongolia, another coal-using country. It is set at 35, but Ulan Bator is well above 35 as an average. Oops. I'm going to skip these details. These are the details of the population exposures in the different kinds of households, what you estimate, outdoors, indoors, the environmental tobacco smoke exposures. You notice as the total exposures go down, the smoking exposures start to be more and more prominent, because we didn't assume any change in household smoking levels, not having any way to do that. In fact, you could argue, I suppose, if you control smoking in public places, you might increase household levels unless awareness arises. So deaths averted, scenario 1, by 2024, the total number of deaths averted, this is 1,500 or so with scenario 1, 4,500 or so with scenario 2, divided in these categories of disease, causes of death. Substantially more, but you get something with scenario 1, but substantially more with scenario 2. This is the lost dallies. If you do nothing, the scenario 1, however, barely keeps up with population and economic growth. After all, the pollution and population are increasing in over this 10 years, and scenario 1 barely keeps up with it. If you want to actually decrease, you have to go to scenario 2. I'm going to skip this economic stuff. You can look at the economic stuff in the paper. So I want to get to conclusions. We did not include an evaluation of the cost of reducing pollution or the particular scenario, particular technologies, although I have considerable thought about that myself at the household level. How would you get rid of coal in household heating in a place that gets to be minus 40? But all the measures are well within current technology, things that other countries have done. Nothing exotic. You don't need to invent new things to do this. We recommend that actually should go fairly aggressively. There's a lot of damage in various ways, not only to mention public opinion about the country and the health impacts. Things are doable. They're probably affordable. It's not a poor country anymore. There are sources of resources. Aggressive actions to bring down to international norms in the next decade. Now, let me just tell a couple of stories. I mentioned there are other types of pollution, but we didn't adjust those. So, do not generate air pollution near people, bad for health. Chimneys are not enough. Just a chimney here just moves the smoke a bit, doesn't get rid of it. And that smoke just stays under this inversion. This may be a room, but actually, the whole city of Ulan Bator is one room in the winter. It may be 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers, but it's only 200 meters high, and it fills up with smoke. You've got, 1.5 million people living in one room with 200,000 coal stoves. It gets very polluted. Chimneys don't help. Clean fuels are particularly important for households. It's where the people are, of course. Almost every other country, modern country, or let's say industrialized country in the world has moved away from solid fuels in households. They have not found a way to make them clean. We have London is a great example. London smog in 1952 is sort of counted at the beginning of the modern era of environmental concerns, certainly in air pollution. Several thousand people died in a week or so because of terrible pollution. What happened? Huge policy response and very aggressive measures to do something about this in London. And by 1972, it was the cleanest city in the world. Might have been the dirtiest city in 1952, but we weren't measuring that many cities in those days. And we weren't measuring all the cities in 72. But those measured, 20 years they did it, but a considerable policy action. And what was the first thing they did? First thing to do was get rid of coal for household heating. The biggest source of this London smog was coal for household heating. So that's no longer possible in London. We have clean fuels there now. So getting back, the old days, a few solid fuel stoves spread across the countryside, didn't matter much. But now with the modern country, you've got terrible pollution. In the winter, at least, because of this, what used to be just a few solid fuel stoves spread across the countryside. Conclusion is, if aggressive action is taken, the average of one premature death a day can be prevented every day for the next 10 years, leaving it as one of the cleanest cities in Asia. I won't say the cleanest cities in the world, but among the cleanest cities in Asia. And this is easier in Ulan Bator than other places. Why is that? My last point. If you look at air pollution in Asia, look at this. These are satellite photographs. There's 20 months of satellite data. Look at the big amounts of air pollution in the great river valleys of Asia. This is the Ganges River Valley, and this is the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys. It's not cities. Why should air pollution pay attention to a city? It goes where the wind takes it. And there are plenty of sources in rural areas, burning of solid fuels, brick kilns, agricultural burning. Air pollution is a regional phenomenon all over the world. So if you want to control air pollution in Delhi or Beijing, places I work substantially, you can't do it in the city itself. You've got to control what happens in the entire region. But in Ulan Bator, so they can't solve their own problems. But Ulan Bator sits, you can barely see it, in a little dense area right there, is in the least densely populated country in the world. So it's like being in the middle of the ocean. It doesn't have to worry about pollution coming from somewhere else. It actually Ulan Bator holds its own destiny in its own hands in terms of air pollution, unlike most other places. I lived in Honolulu for 20 years. That's another place that controls its own destiny, no air pollution nearby it. Ulan Bator isn't in the middle of the ocean, but it lives in the middle of, a beautiful and low-density country. Oops. So, whether it's 5 million people, 5 people or 1 million people living in one room, you can't have dirty things going on in there, whether it's burning cigarettes or burning coal. So, thank you very much. Okay. I guess we'll have questions at the end if we have time. Ujay, you hear about lead.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank to the organizers giving me such a wonderful opportunity to present some of our work with given such the short notice. And thank you very much for all of you that come in from different places. And I'm really enjoying the symposium here and looking forward to the upcoming events. So today I would like to talk about the current environmental health challenges as well as the opportunities that we are facing in Mongolia. And in contrast, I will talk about the lead exposure among school children in Ulan Bator, the survey that we conducted the last year. So we all know the Mongolia, and Mongolia, I just wanted to emphasize that we have the beautiful 4 seasons. And recently Mongolia, they really enjoyed the high economic growth, and it's selected as the highest the growing economy in the 2014. However, the situation is a bit different now. The structure of the economy is still remain the same. The more than 80% of our the GDP is coming from the mining, the operation. So this the economy growth, really brought the urban growth. As you can see, that the old and the new the buildings. Skyscrapers in the city, as well as in the countryside. You see the clash between in the mining operation and the traditional lifestyle. So, as the public health the practitioner, what we have to look for is how to having the mining dominated economies. We cannot avoid it. So, how to have sustainable and with the least the harmful effect with the mining activity. So Mongolian government and the parliament has passed the amendment on the law on environmental health That included the health impact assessment, requiring all all the projects to have both environmental and health impact assessments. However, it is nicely written in the paper, but at the moment, currently Mongolia, we don't have enough in-country human and the technical capacity to conduct adequate the health impact assessment. So to address that issue, in 2012, our department was established, the Department of Environmental Health Science, at the School of Public Health in National Medical University of Mongolian National University of Medical Science. So what we have is we established the first the graduate program focused on environmental and occupational health. So today I would like to focus on the three things. The first one, as I said earlier, that urban air pollution, health effects, more importantly, the personal exposure. And that would include the lead exposure among the children in the UP. And I would like to propose the points. The first one is the solution. What would be the solution? The solution meaning, since I'm not an engineer, I'm not the medical doctor, I would like to focus on how to minimize the health effects, what we should do to keep the adequate monitoring to have the minimal adverse effect. So for that, the solution is actually not a new problem. It's that we have tons of examples to learn from. So I just wanted to say, don't reinvent the wheel. And the point I would like to make is that Mongolia really gives a unique opportunity. As Dr. Smith said, that the problem of air pollution, Ulan Bator city, is within the city, and also because of the unique, the seasonal, the geographical, the setting. It really provides us the unique opportunity. So we will go there again. So we all know, we all agree that the air pollution is the serious issue. If we take the seasonal variation, this is just the January. Ulan Bator city, we reached that minus 34 Celsius, and at the same time, I just checked that the temperature in Antarctica, and actually Ulan Bator city was much colder. And given that if you take the winter season and the Gers district in Ulan Bator city, this is the worst place to be in terms of air pollution. So as I mentioned before, because of the economic growth and the urban, the population is truly increasing. And the main sources would include the Gers and the power stations and the cars. So since the air pollution is an issue, what we should do, in addition to monitoring the atmospheric, the pollutants, we have to check that we have to measure the exposure level. So that's why we aim to determine the blood lead level among children aged 6 to 8 who are living in Ulan Bator city, and to identify potential risk factors for the increase of blood lead level. So this is very simple, just a survey that we use the lead care, that is the screening method. And we selected the 4 different the school that can represent the geographically the different areas and the socioeconomic the status of Ulan Bator city. And total of 153 children were tested in our study. Our main the findings are that the average the blood lead level among children in Ulan Bator city was 6.3 microgram per deciliter. It was, we measured it in the March, assuming that all the exposures after the winter exposure. Just to let you know that the CDC, the recommendation for the blood lead level is at the 5 microgram per deciliter. In Ulan Bator city, more than half of the children we tested were above the CDC recommended blood lead level. And I would like to note that the 5 microgram per deciliter still is lead we shouldn't have it in our blood. And now the evidence, the scientific literature already demonstrating that even low, the level of blood lead level affects has an adverse effect for the children's behavior as well as the IQ. And the risk factors, we used a questionnaire to detect some risk factors. And in our study, we found the boys that had the higher the risk, and the father's education and father's job were the risk factors. So I would like to say that a smart man learns from his mistakes. A wise one learns from the mistakes of others. So the lead issue is not, as I said, not the new issue. And we have what other industrialized, the developed countries did to eliminate the lead is based on the surveillance survey, the nationwide assessment. They could monitor the blood lead level, and the thing was that they eliminated the lead from the gasoline. We are hoping that Mongolia is using unleaded gasoline, as the report says. So the main thing is just that to have adequate monitoring the system is necessary. In the United States, every single the children are tested for blood lead level, and that test is covered by the insurance. However, in Mongolia, given the air pollution is such a big issue, but still we don't have the system to test the blood lead level in Mongolia yet. So the why it's important. We say that the economic the burden it may have. Indeed, it's not, because when we see the cost effectiveness of the different the programs, we can see that the environmental intervention, which is the preventive action, actually has the more the cost the saving effect than any other the interventions, even better than the vaccination. So in the United States, they have the National Health and the Nutrition Examination Survey. This is the big the survey, but in Mongolia we can start with just the environmental exposure assessment. Started because since the mining activity will be the major the activity in the economic growth, we cannot avoid, and we really do we really do need the nationwide the surveillance system. The second thing I would like to say that there's the saying, never let the serious crisis go to waste. So we know air pollution is a serious issue. So how to make the best of it? So in the different cities, I really enjoyed reading this the article, and I would like to share it with you. You know, in 2008, when Beijing had the Olympic, they were able to reduce the air pollution dramatically and could hold it for 3 months. As Dr. Smith said, that it's a regional the problem there, but in China, they were able to reduce it. Shutting down the factories, not only in Beijing, around the Beijing. And during that time, the researchers from Duke and China, they registered the birth and compared the birth weight of the children who were born during the Beijing Olympic period, the 3 months period, and compared it with the before and after, and also the same months previous year. And then they found that the children who were born during during the Olympic period, they were 23 grams heavier than the children who were born before and after. So the Mongolia, if we see that during the Beijing Olympic there was the decrease, and they could detect the difference. But in Mongolia, in Ulan Bator city, we have summer and the winter. The main air pollution issue is that the difference between the summer and the winter. It provides us the unique opportunity, like a natural experimental setting. So during the summer, we all know the air pollution level is almost as clean. So this can provide us the different the research, the questions that may lead us to question and further study some causal effects, because up to now the air pollution and the health effects are showing the correlation, not yet for the causation. So the places like Ulan Bator, this unique the setting may provide us the opportunity to study the different, the deeper the questions, and to pursue for mechanistic the answers. So, and this is the correlation that demonstrated the air pollution and the spontaneous miscarriage. So, with that, I would like to say the Mongolia, Ulan Bator city, we really need the national environmental exposure assessment program, and also that we have the very unique situation that can provide the natural experimental setting. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Very interesting. Larry?
Well, as you can see by this sort of boring title, this is a very specific study that was done by a group of people I'm associated with at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is located just up the hill from here, looking at emissions from different stove use practices in Mongolia. But I think the study has some broader implications, and I'll try to bring those out for you. Very large cast of characters. Some people there, particular Dr. Lonesamba from Mongolia, but many of the people there were or are still at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I don't have a light stick, so I'll do it this way. As everybody has heard, UB air quality is pretty bad. It may be the worst air quality of a large capital city anywhere in the world. It's largely due, I gather, from the immigration of people from pastoral areas in the country who've settled around Ulan Bator as they've sought better schools or jobs or health care. All these things were issues that were brought up in a survey we did talking to people in the Gers district. And I also understand it may have to do with a loss of subsidies for some of those same things in the pastoral regions of Mongolia. I think there was a lot of government support that made it easier to live in the countryside during the Soviet era than now. So be that as it may, there's been a massive immigration to the capital city. The capital city is located in a valley, as you've heard, and it's quite a pleasant spot, actually, if the air quality is nice. There's these large rolling hills to the south. When I was there, I would go on hikes up to the top of that hill, and with beautiful views out to the south, you can see, you imagine you're looking out towards the Gobi Desert. It's kind of exciting, empty country. But if you get up there and turn around and try to take pictures of the city, what you're looking at is the modern city of Ulan Bator and the hills in the north, which are where the Gers districts largely are located. So as you can see, it's a contained area. The air quality can get pretty bad, particularly because people coming to the region, living in these Gers regions like this, are burning coal in the winter to stay warm. And they have been using largely traditional stoves, which are quite well suited for the pastoral areas, but not so well suited for the urban area, because the air quality is much worse when you're burning coal in these traditional stoves. This is sort of a typical part of the Gers district, a region that we were working in. It looks very chaotic, but it's actually fairly organized. There are community leaders, there's streets, I found even a little bit of civic pride. I mean, it was interesting for me to go visit for that region. A little bit of background for this study. We were funded to do the work by a group called the Millennium Challenge Corporation. They're sort of a market-oriented aid agency of the U.S. government. They have a notion of, when possible, rely on markets and private property rights to improve conditions. And otherwise, if you have an environmental externality like this, try to very carefully measure benefits and costs of an improvement. And then in this case, it was, if you know what the benefit of your improvement is, then try to subsidize what you want to do with that precise benefit. It was interesting to me. I'm an economist, but I found this a little strange given the uncertainties that we have about almost all the variables in this situation. But the idea in this case was to distribute a huge number of, as I say, very carefully determined subsidies for these stoves. And in fact, they have been picked up by the population. People were at the time very quickly snapping up these stoves. Just so you know, here's a traditional stove, easy to make. You can cook on them. It's sort of like the hearth in, the American West. A little bit of a religious connotation to it. Whoops. And here's a new stove. And this is the majority of the new stoves that were being brought in that burn coal more efficiently, and the idea is to make the air quality better. They're kind of nice looking. It's a little strange because they're made in Turkey. And although when we left, we visited some kids in Mongolia, students who were putting together a company to build Mongolian stoves that I think are going to be just as good. But at the time, this is what they were largely distributing, stoves like this. And this particular stove, called the Silver Mini, based upon emission factors, measurements of PM 2.5, as you've been hearing about previous talks, if you use it correctly, it will burn a whole lot more cleanly than the traditional stove. But you need to read the fine print, because to use them correctly, has to have what's called a cold start. The coal has to burn all the way down. The stove has to be at least not hot. Put in new coal, 2/3 full, and then you light it from the top. That's what makes it clean. You use a little bit of wood, start the burn at the top, and then it goes right through the coal, so you get very little smoke if you do it just right. It implies, if you think about it, and if you know how the characteristics of the stove, that you'll get about 2 burns in a 24-hour period if you do it just right. So here's an outline of the talk. Basically, our goal is to compare emissions under ideal use of this stove with actual use. We went to the households to try to get a sense of what actual use was, and I think we got a pretty good idea of it. We wanted to measure emissions in a lab under ideal and actual use, and then compare the two measurement techniques. Compare the two measures of pollution. And as a sort of a bonus, we discovered there's all kinds of problems measuring emissions from stoves. And one of the technicians in the group, Randy Madalena, came up with what he thinks is a much better technique for measuring emissions. And you can compare the measures using that one with what's actually used and has been used in the past for most estimates of emissions from these stoves. And the conclusions from that are a little bit depressing. So first, the idea was to identify actual use patterns. We focused on one of the districts with a large number of households, 32,000 households. We only could visit, it's actually not easy to just walk into an area and visit people. It's not so different than it would be here. But we managed to find 30 households that were happy to talk to us. And of those, we got some fairly good information from about 18 of the Gers. We were there during the 2011-2012 heating season, just so you know. And we did mostly in-person interviews. We had lots of conversations with people. Here's the district. I don't pronounce it right, Chinglete district. Sort of a long, narrow district, that green part of the map. You can just barely make out the shaded part of the downtown, the old city, which is at the bottom of Chinglete district and moves along and kind of east-west along the river. And you can see these little diamonds, which are the actual Gers that we visited. And it was, I have to say, maybe I should stand back. I'm an economist. I don't do stoves. I don't do these kind of interviews very often. I was with people who do. So I'm trying to explain what happened in the research, but mostly for me, it was just a really interesting, enjoyable experience. So I'm sorry I'm not going to have a lot of details for you, but one of the examples was here's a household that adopted one of these Turkish stoves. You can see it's nice and shiny. Many of the households are not poor. Many of them are, but many are not poor. This one, the guy has a television set. They're watching a wrestling match, which was going on during the time. When it turned out he knew I wrestled in high school, we got along just great. We had a good conversation. And, it gives you a little sense. This was the guy. He worked for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, but he went around with us and did the interpreting. I don't speak Mongolian. We didn't speak Mongolian. And then this guy is one of the students that worked with us who went around and did follow-up surveys to pick up information. Here's a traditional stove household. Similar sets of questions. Why didn't you want the new stove? One of the issues was the new stoves aren't as good for cooking. So we did two main things in the survey that I'm going to talk about anyway. First, we wanted to get actual measurements that we could rely on sort of quantitatively over a whole heating season for how the stoves were being used. And we ended up using these little devices called sums that Kirk Smith's group has come up with, and we were able to buy a number of these temperature recording devices from that group. And in the households, we would ask permission, and most people were willing to let us put little temperature sensing devices next to the stoves, which would allow us to see, and you'll see in some charts coming up, how stove temperatures varied over the period of time that the survey was taking place. You don't need to look at too many of these details, but basically I want to show you three temperature profiles that were picked up from those devices. One is how the traditional stoves are used, how the Silver Mini is used, and what it would look like if the users are largely following manufacturing specifications that I mentioned to you. And then a Silver Mini stove profile in which we think is showing more commonly used practices. Here, this is a sort of a schematic showing you where we placed these temperature devices next to the stove, three locations in particular that we were able to measure. I should say each of those sums can record temperature on 5-minute intervals lasting for up to a couple of weeks. So we would go back. We had somebody, that student would go back every couple of weeks, replace the old sum with the new sum, and then record the temperature data. So we got information over a 3-month period and averaged it to show what a typical week would look like. And here you can see a typical week, temperatures associated with a traditional stove. And you know, 2 features that stand out are you get these big dips here in temperature for all 3 of the sums. And this one is late, very late at night, very early in the morning. The stove has gone out, and somebody in the household gets up, they put coal in the stove, and it starts up again. And then it burns for a while, and then people are feeling cold, they put a little more coal in the stove. You just sort of put it in periodically. So you get this sort of characteristic up and down feature until the night, and then people go to bed, and then it stays warm for a while, and then cools off. Here's 2 similar profiles for the silver mini stove. And this is the profile following manufacturer's specifications, in which you get basically 2 burns during the day. Maybe you can't see it very well, but there were several households actually that were using them correctly. And so for those households, emissions were going to be a good bit lower from that household than they would have been for the coal stove. But there are also lots of households that did, on the right-hand side, that used the stoves a lot more like the traditional stoves. So that during the day, they would pile some coal on when the stove seemed to be going down and it seemed to be getting colder. There's a potential problem with that, which is that if you've ever gone camping and made a campfire, and you put sort of cold logs on top of a campfire that's beginning to go out, very frequently get tons of smoke. And something like that happens with these stoves, particularly these Turkish mini stoves, if you smother the fire in the process of trying to warm it up again during the middle of the day, if you don't follow manufacturer directions. We had somebody in the group put together a computer program to read over all the stove temperature profiles. We had lots of them. It's a huge amount of data. But here's some averages showing that there were several households, at least a third of the households would have more than 2 refuelings during the day. And that gives you a little sense of a lot of households pretty much doing the right thing, but a fair number not doing the right thing. So the next thing we wanted to do was we took the information from the survey, went back to the labs up at LBL. We got the Turkish manufacturer to send us a Turkish stove, which they did. It was pretty nice. We got a traditional stove. We got coal from Mongolia. And we put it all together in a lab and then did a whole series of tests of how much emissions would there be if you use the stoves correctly and if you use them incorrectly. And I'll summarize that information for you. Here's the lab setup. There's the Turkish stove down at the bottom. We put sums around it so we could assure ourselves that we were getting the same information that we did in the Gers. But an unusual thing about this is that very large canister at the top. That was put up there after we did some initial tests and found that it's pretty hard to measure emissions from a stove using the techniques that most people use. Am I running out of time? 5 minutes. Here's a schematic. Traditionally, and almost every measurement that everybody was aware of beforehand, you're pulling smoke out of the chimney and diluting the smoke, and then measuring particulates that way. And all of the equipment used for that traditional kind of way to measure emissions is located at the bottom. The stuff at the top was this thing that Randy Maddalena came up with, which is to try to measure pollution in a situation a lot more like actually exists, where you have this big canister. Think of that as the open air. You pull the smoke out of the open air situation and then measure emissions that way. Now we're going to make some comparisons. Here's test results. First thing to notice is the Silver Mini can improve air quality. LB and L, that's us at the lab measurements. The other groups, there are other measurements that are cited here. The Silver Mini, at the top, there's been a measurement of emissions from the traditional. We actually didn't do that, even though we tried a couple of times. We were unsuccessful at getting a good measurement. But the general thinking was that the emission factor is about 11.6. But the Silver Mini, in the past, has been measured with almost no emissions at all, 0.03. We got, when we used our Chimney technique, that's the traditional approach, we get a 0.33. So still, it's a lot cleaner. The other finding is that actual actual emissions can be higher than assumed because of this practice of late refueling, putting coal on top of a burning stove. So we get, in this case, you can compare, I think that red line has shifted a little bit, sorry about that, but the late refueling that we found was 2.3, whereas the actual use is 0.33. So almost a factor of 10 higher is likely to be the case if you're not using these things as the manufacturers tell you to do. And then the third lesson is, this is comparing the Chimney method with what we call the exhaust method, using that great big canister to try to show what actually happens. I got 1 minute. So the problem here is that it may be that all the measurements anybody's ever seen could be a factor of 10 too low. Actual emissions may be much higher, no matter what the stove. So I'll draw 3 conclusions. Subsidized stoves, they're often improperly used. This can result in significantly higher emissions than the MCC suggested should be used. The widely used emission tests now used to try to figure out how much pollution there is in UB, they're liable to be biased. In fact, an order of magnitude too low. So I guess in the end, this is a kind of a cautionary talk. No matter what studies you want to do, they're all in the end based on numbers like these. And these numbers can be really far off. It's very, very hard to do work in the field getting measurements like this. So stepping back even further and thinking about the group that was funding this study, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, it was almost laughable how precise they wanted to be with the kind of subsidy that was given for the stoves, given we have only an order of magnitude notion of what the stoves will do in terms of benefits. While we were there, it turned out the city of Ulan Bator was so annoyed at how slowly the stoves were being sold that they put in a massive subsidy. The MCC got really annoyed because the subsidy wasn't exactly equal to the precise benefit that people like me were measuring. So in the end, there was a little argument, but of course the city won, and lots of those stoves are in the field. But clearly something more has to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. So our last speaker in this session is Oyan Gerol, who was introduced previously, and is not speaking from slides. You remember the ancient Greek philosopher who said that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So.
And just as Baljinnyam was speaking today, I was remembering the Alicia's also presentation where she pointed out one of the mistakes of our policymakers, how we spend our money wrongly when we had lots of cash from commodity good harvest, And that was election year of 2008. And every political party was promising something to voters that to get votes. And MPRP of that time, but now it's MPP, promised to give 1 million to cash for everyone from the mining income. So it happened that after the end of 2008 election, MPRP actually monopolized the parliament. They had they could single-handedly form a cabinet, but because of that heavy promise, they invited Democrats to the cabinet in order to share the burden of giving away that money. So what happened was there was a coalition government, despite Democratic Party was a minority in there. We didn't need to be in the cabinet by that time, but we were invited. So the joint MPP and Democratic government together handed out $3 billion. It's like twice more than Chinggis bond. Handed out $3 billion to elderly, disabled, and those who petitioned to receive that 1 million tugruk. I remember my dad was saying that he was 79 by then, and he said, well, I'll probably never see the real revenue from mining, and I better take this 1 million. You guys are young, so think about your government, think about your country. I'll just order that 1 million, and I will get that money. And he got that money. And recently I was meeting with my voters in Hanol district, and then suddenly one woman raises her hand and asks me, MP Oyungirl, when I'm going to receive interests from that town hall stock. And then I said, and then the other person says, but this woman received that 1 million tugruk in 2010. So I told her that if you receive that cash handout, you don't have any stock in any broker's house because your account is closed because you received all the benefits early on by cash. So by talking like this, I'm telling that we had cash, we had money to solve all these problems. But we didn't solve these problems because these issues were never high on our agenda. And on our agenda was always how to get next vote. So that's why this is a very critical time. This symposium is being held at a very critical time in order not to make another such mistake if we have cash. we might not have cash, but if we have money again, where to spend and what is the priority, and that's we really need a very clear vision where to spend our money. So going into the air pollution. So air pollution, as you just saw from previous speakers, we used donors' money. We used our money. We used American taxpayers' money into stoves, which means into using the coal again. So our new solution that we are discussing now at the Parliament is just months ago we started discussing completely new rhetoric in terms of air pollution, in solution of air pollution problem. Just 1 month ago, Parliament debated and actually approved National Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals. And during that discussion, we also discussed Paris Agreement, how Mongolia should adapt its policy into Paris Agreement. So during that discussion, the first time in Mongolian Parliament, the Gers district heating was a special agenda to discuss. And before, it was like an electricity problem, a heating issue. There was air pollution in general terms. But because of the studies that today you presented on children's health issues and Ulan Bator city's lung cancer issues, all these issues were so much publicized lately in Mongolian media that because of that, we were pressured to have separate agenda in our national goal for sustainable development, that we have to tackle the Gers district heating separately than anything else. So when I was elected as a chairwoman or chairperson of the subcommittee on air pollution reduction in the Parliament, my subcommittee's first meeting under my leadership occurred just during that discussion, just before that discussion at the parliament. And our subcommittee actually put a very ambitious call in front of, demanded a very ambitious goal from the cabinet, making a resolution that cabinet should submit its action plan to eliminate Gers district coal-produced, coal-based pollution in 5 years. So that was our pressure to the cabinet, and cabinet kept saying 5 years is too short to eliminate Gers district coal burning emissions. But then, right after a week after that decision at subcommittee, the general hearing at the parliament was heated up with the air pollution-related debate, and the MPP from the other corner was demanding that eliminating Gers district coal burning is impossible. And Democrats were saying, no, it's possible, we should make it. So why this discussion was so interesting is because it's election year. Finally, during the election year, some debate is going to happen. Maybe because of this debate, people might benefit and the air might benefit. And then our subcommission's ambitious goal of reducing, no, even eliminating coal-based heating in Gers district was shrunk into 4 years. So when cabinet says, no, 5 years was short term, but 4 years is even impossible, and then some MPs even argued, okay, if you think it's impossible, we will put you 2 years goal. so accept this 4-year goal and make your action plan and reduce it, invest into clean heating and do it in 4 years. So why this sounds like a capricious decision of the parliament from outsiders, but from insiders, from Mongolians like us, it is very realistic that we might reach to cleaning, we might actually clean up the air pollution in 4 years. Because, as our speakers previously said, it's possible because Ulan Bator is a very separate problem from all other regions. And secondly, there are technologies now. Last winter's best-selling item was heating systems that is not using coal. Electric heating system that is using low voltage electricity and also low watt electricity and many other solutions, localized gas solutions, etc. And so if we invest right, if we use our remaining little money right, we might reach this goal, and this goal is now official. Parliament already passed, which means in every budget hearing beginning from autumn 2016, actually Parliament must delegate money to city of Ulan Bator and also other decentralized cities. But before, coal was the king. Coal was the king because everybody was relying on coal, and whoever wanted to break down coal selling network in Ulan Bator was in trouble. The latest example is Prime Minister Altınhoyuk. His 2 advisors, his 2 assistants, his daughter, his confidant, everybody around him was arrested and jailed just because he made cheaper coal available to the Gers district. Looks like a very stupid political conflict going on, but in fact it's not such a stupid conflict because coal selling is the biggest business in town during winter months. During just 3 months to 4 months of winter, Ulan Bator's coal selling network would have 70 billion Tugriks revenue just selling the coal to the Gers district area. Because coal is cheaper this year, people are buying more and burning more, which means the total revenue still remains around 70 billion Tugriks. So because this is the biggest business in town during such a short period of time, it makes people rich very fast. So everybody who's interested in this business will be potential danger for those who are bringing new technology in town. So latest one of the action plans that government should consider while supporting the scaling up of new businesses and the new heating systems is safety of those companies or the initiators and engineers and inventors who are actually replacing this coal business in town. Because this is going to be, in one hand, it's a dirty business because of coals is very dirty for air pollution. Secondly, because it involves so much money, the actually safety of the new businesses is in concern. So that's why protection from racketeering, extortion, and violence has to be considered in government plan. And right now, while we discuss these issues in Berkeley, in Ulan Bator now Prime Minister's advisors are busy interviewing startup businesses of Ulan Bator who are doing innovations and patenting innovations and also selling products on market in their own small scales. That is bringing heating systems which is based on non-fuel sources. So that is one issue we need to tackle, and this is a good time to discuss more publicly in Mongolia because election time is approaching, and especially before election, parties want to do a lot because they cannot self-promote or do some kind of paid advertisement before the election, but if government does something, they get credit for all the good works. So it's like a free publicity for any political party or any politician to do a good job before election. So sometimes some laws are very locked right before election, but some good laws and popular laws are passed very fast right before the election. And I'm very hopeful that a law on waste management that I submitted will be passed, and also some laws, especially related to the budget. We are going to hear a budget agenda, general budget overview of 2016 in April. So when we hear the budget overview for the next year, the late April or mid-April debate in the Parliament should also consider the budget agenda in which we should also push for the air pollution budget. Last summer, we had a very big sensational stories on all over Mongolian media about the stinky smell and about poor sanitation of Ulan Bator's sewage plants. And that was overwhelmingly informative to everybody that finally in Parliament we had critical mass to understand that issue. And that's why in the budget hearing of 2015, we managed to put unheard of before budget for tackling sanitation problems, and the same we are expecting the same positive energy will be brought by the Sustainable Development Agenda discussions and also all this air pollution information that's been publicized this year. And also another consideration of what can government do for the short term before the election is that we don't have much time, but what we have, what is very different from previous elections is there are two big differences from previous elections. In previous elections, candidates had to find big donors to run for parliament, to run for constituency. This year, there is a big public push and also new legislation to decrease the election funding, election cost. So we have a new law on election which reduces the day of campaigning, which reduces the cost of campaigning in many different ways. Before we had 28 days to campaign. At this time, in this election, we will have 18 days to campaign. So it will reduce our election spending twice, first of all. Secondly, in past, we had to pay for every billboard to put our pictures, and that will cost a lot. And now, in this new election, candidates must put their promotions in a small size in public spaces for free. So that will reduce lots of election costs. And there are other things in the law that will reduce our election cost a lot. Before, media would charge candidates 2 or 3 times more money per second or per minute of advertisement compared to the usual advertisement cost during the election time. So according to new law, media shall not inflate their price during election campaign time, and they should charge the average amount of advertising costs that they had in the previous 12 months. So which will also decrease the television cost and other media costs for the campaigners. So what does it mean? It means that actually there will be lots of candidates who couldn't run before could run now. And we might see many new candidates. Also, we might see, because of the short time of campaigning, maybe incumbents will be more popular and more easily elected, but at the same time, the agendas will be talked about by many people. So even so, because of the short term of campaigning time, because there will be so many candidates will be affording to campaign like everybody else, there will be lots of issues discussed during the campaign time. So lots of issues with information and the urgent agendas will be brought out to the public knowledge, and the campaign time is usually very good public education time for Mongolia because everybody is very energized during the campaign. So because of that, I think pre-campaign politics will be very important for every candidate in every party. So now in Mongolia, in the media, especially social media is also very influential, but social media doesn't mean the votes. The real voters are usually those who don't have social media, so that's why politicians now are going. If you see now Mongolian newspapers, everybody's going to countryside, everybody's going to constituencies to meet and to bring out the agenda and tell what they are going to do about air pollution, what they're going to do about waste, etc. So it's going to be quite a different campaign from previous campaigns. And also another difference of our campaign this year's election year of previous years that we don't have enough money as a government. Before we had money, and then all we were competing was how to spend that money. We will give you this, we will give you that, we will hand out this one, then that one. So that was a campaign, and that campaign is legally prohibited now because we cannot promise any handouts that will exceed our budget capacity. So according to new law on election and according to new law on budget consistency, we cannot promise cash handouts anymore. And that's why parties will be now competing to more clever agenda, how to save up economy, how to bring up economy back, and at the same time have to be sustainable, have to provide sustainable livelihood to the people. So these are the two differences. And also what we cannot do is very quite clear because we don't have enough time for the next election. We cannot do much to revolutionize everything. But what we can do is we can spend the remaining money into better investment, and especially on the air pollution side. As a subcommittee chair on the reduction of air pollution, I'm really pushing government to spend the remaining money, if there is any remaining money, for startups, helping them to scale up and helping them to bring bring new heating systems to Gers district. So far, for example, in just a few months, we cannot invest too much into changing the whole economic structure of going away from coal, but we can insist on not using coal in Gers district. So, which will be government have to bring that plan before April 1, and our subcommittee is due to discuss this action plan on air pollution reduction in early April. So that's our plan to discuss it. And when we discuss it, we will have to ask engineers, we will have to ask economists whether this government plan of action is actually doable, and then there will be lots of discussion how to allocate money to that. So that is we are expecting, but we are not expecting to do too much. But there is one, Balorma just told us, Mongolians have this strange character to adapt very quickly. So this is one secret why nomadic herding is still surviving today, because nomadic herding society, the herding itself as a culture is a very adaptive culture. So like that, our government is also can do miracles in very few days, or can't do anything for a long time. Sometimes it's like that. So if you had a Mongolian student, probably you might have noticed that sometimes Mongolian students sleep and don't do their homework, but in one day they do all the homeworks sometimes. So like that, our parliament sometimes sleeps on one agenda, and once in a while, they just wake up and boom, they make a revolution. Sometimes they do that. Yeah, we witnessed it on many laws. While I was in parliament, I witnessed especially, cigarette ban, indoor smoking ban. The whole country changed just in 3 months, and that was very remarkable because parliament changed, rhetorics changed, media changed, everybody changed, and just it was enforced very efficiently. So like that, things sometimes happens very miraculously. Sometimes we need lots of long push, but it's always about critical mass. How many politicians understand the issue? How many voters understand the issue is very, very important, and how many journalists understand the issue is, of course, very important. And the more we talk, of course, the more we are closer to the making the real change. So I think today's symposium will benefit. Today's symposium will really help change Mongolia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps we could suggest a foreign aid program from Mongolia to the U.S., because we could certainly use getting money out of politics here. In fact, I mean, more seriously, it's probably the single biggest barrier to a lot of environmental problems here, because solving a lot of environmental problems here. So do we have time for some questions to the whole panel? Yes, okay. Can the other panelists come up and we can get some more chairs? Pooja? So let's start. Any questions? Let's try starting, just ask an individual panelist questions from the audience. Please.
This is just a simple comment to parliamentarian Oyungerel to put the context of the handouts in 2008 into out here for us to consider. The reason that the government and the parties agreed to these handouts was because they were being pressured by the foreign expert community, including the IMF and World Bank, to do something about the income inequality and the failure of many citizens to feel that they were going to get anything from these big mining deposit developments. So because everyone at that time was talking about the two different societies, rural and urban, and the failure of the rural society to benefit, Mongolian policymakers were pressured by the outsiders to do something quickly which would reflect on the statistical side an improvement in the poverty alleviation statistics. So they came up with this unique way. So it's not that Mongolia themselves thought of this. It's foreign experts sometimes pressuring Mongolians about an issue to take a chance, and that's why the cash handouts were, from one point of view, misspent.
Any comments?
The real big cash handout promise actually came out during the election campaign time. So if there was a pressure from outside advisors from during election time, would be illegal of that time. But probably the idea was probably talked about. One cash handout we still continue now is called children's money. That was actually also supported by international experts. But that is small money compared to that million tugruk handout. That was 20,000 tugruk per month per child, which is at today's standard, it's $8 per child per month. But when the MPRP promised during election of 2008, 1 million cash handout came out just 1 week before the voting day. That was very sudden, and that was very exciting to every voter, of course. And then, because that promise came out after the election platform of every party was registered by election committee, we learned the lesson from that, and then we made a law that would prohibit political parties to change or upgrade or update their election promise after they submitted their platform program to the General Election Committee. So that 2008 big cash handout was actually a big mistake. And because people voted overwhelmingly to MPRP, we were stuck and had to fulfill some promise, but couldn't, of course, give to everybody 1 million. That's why, even though we had lots of cash then, the government gave money only to elderly people who is above 60 years old, and then disabled people. But still, that required $3 billion.
It's such a trivial question. I'm not sure it's worth the microphone, but I was just curious to ask you, Kirk, about your categories. You had ger and apartment and then house. And I was just curious because in Ulan Bator, which has increasingly become Otane Bator in recent years, a new word has emerged, which is house, which actually sort of means something rather different from the more humble dwellings that might be built and used to be called bashing or something like that. So I'm just wondering if your house category is the much grander house which has emerged, or if it's just the smaller built structures that often appear in the Gers next to other Gers.
The latter, the smaller version, but of course, if we were doing it today, maybe we'd have to have a fourth category. I mean, there are lots, there are tents, there are, giant mansions and so forth. You have to limit it, reasonably for an assessment. Is my being right, Drew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Census, 2013 census, which showed about 1% of households made up these, what the census called luxury houses, which I assume is quite the same category. So we decided to leave that 1% out, maybe much larger.
Yeah, we also had a very big conversation about that.
Yeah.
Division, because we have a division in their district. We also have a house,
Yes.
Which is also the heating from central heating. So we separate.
Another question here?
Sorry, and Also a very minor question, and kind of following along David's, this is a question mostly for Larry. In your studies as well, were you segregating out Gers from fixed dwellings? And if I could add a little to that, actually I'll add one small detail, which is the house I was living in Songina Kharkhan. Actually, my family got one of these MCC stoves, and I was never aware that there was actually a proper use for it as well. I don't think my family knew this. But I'm just curious about this whole discourse about the cooking and the not being able to use this for cooking, if that also entered into your research with the electric hot plates and the reduced electrical rates in the evening, if any of that played into it.
Well, it's true. There were a lot of built structures next to the Gers, but we only looked at the Gers, and it was more of a sidebar that we noticed that a lot of people had hot plates. Almost every one of the Gers that we visited had hot plates. So the cooking load is kind of shifting to electricity load in some places. But like I say, it wasn't part of this calculation. We were really just focused on heating and the pollution from heating stoves.
I mean, our surveys, just interject that there wasn't a lot of pure coal. I mean, coal used only for cooking. It was either with heating plus some cooking, or if it was just cooking, it was usually electric. Some LPG, that is, what we call propane in the U.S., cylinders of LPG. I might say, though, that electric cooking devices are changing rapidly. I mean, the new induction cook stoves are 50% more efficient, and they're coming in rapidly in China. And in India, their growth is 35% a year in India, the sales of these things. The country of Ecuador is changing 100% to induction stoves. Drew and I are going to Bhutan next week. They're talking about changing out 100% because they're so efficient. And then, the load for electricity often is not bad for cooking, depending on what's happening in the country. And if a country has hydropower, like Ecuador and Bhutan, it makes a lot of sense. Now, in Mongolia, the electricity is made mostly from coal. But it's a lot better to burn the coal out there somewhere than inside the house. So I think electric cooking is likely to, and then there's water kettles and rice cookers and a range of specialized electric devices that are very efficient what they do. It's the space heating it's the really hard one. And it's hard to get efficient space heating with electricity when it's minus 40 degrees outside. Here you can get efficient space heating with electricity because you can use heat pumps. But you can't, below about minus 20, heat pumps don't work. So it's I don't know. I mean, this is a challenge. But there are, you can use, let me just say, it hasn't talked about the technologies. We've talked a bit about it. But electricity, maybe. But gas is probably the way that is the next fuel. Now, what kind of gas? You can use LPG, propane, but the country doesn't have any resources of natural gas or petroleum where that comes from. They'd have to import it. They import some, but probably don't want to import that much. But you can make synthetic LPG, as it's called, from coal. So it's one of the syn fuels that are made from coal, and so that's, I think, the most likely next step. And actually the Chinese, you can always say the Chinese are doing something. They're making 1 million tons a year of this synthetic LPG, so it's not a mystery technology or unavailable. And the next, or in the step of coal gas, and that's where you gasify the coal outside of town and have pipelines bringing it in. That's how we did it in this country in the East Coast. That's how Europe did it first. That's how China did it first. They're moving away from coal gas. They're moving to natural gas, but they can use the same pipelines. So Mongolia has prospects for natural gas. It has a negative connotation here. It's called fracking, but in the business, it's shale gas. And I don't think there's any development now, but there's certainly exploration. So those are kind of the ways that have been thinking about moving toward a cleaner space heating. Now, it doesn't make much sense also to heat something that's got very poorly insulated, and most of the heat is going out the door. So and maybe that's not, actually the Gers are pretty well insulated, but not necessarily the houses or the apartments. So you need to have a system by which you're using the heat effectively, but this is doable too. It's been done in other places. Eastern Europe used to be heavily coal burning and now is much improved. I mean, so there are pathways to follow. And since the one last thing is that, just last week, speaking of big steps by parliaments, the Indian parliament just announced that they're going to provide clean LPG to 50 million new households, to get rid of not coal, but another solid fuel, biomass, cow dung, wood, and this kind of thing. So there's and they have some very interesting ideas about how they might do that promotion. Of course, they have some of their own LPG, unlike you, but if you use synthetic LPG, that might be an option. So, the world is changing. Ecuador is going full induction stoves. India is providing it for 50 million households. Now's a good time to get into this.
Maybe this is something for the next panel or whatever, but so a lot of the problems have been very well articulated, and some of the solutions are fairly clear. What are the priorities dealing with some of these things? It seems to me there are two problems big problems that can be solved one way. Mongolia lacks an infrastructure, and if it's a big country full of space, half the people live in one little valley between four mountains. It lacks roads. If there would be some old infrastructure rebuilt, that would solve. You'd get two birds with one stone. You'd solve an agricultural problem that you've had since the loss of the Soviet the cooperative system and all of that, and you would alleviate a lot of the pressure on Ulan Bator. Anyway, but the question is priorities. So there's waste disposal and pollution and all of these things, but also problems with the countryside.
It's a very hard question because I'll talk to election again. During election time, I told you that it's a very short campaign. It's going to be a very short campaign. And of course, every political parties will outline many political agendas. But what happens in practice is that one candidate representing one party goes to one constituency and has only 18 days to, for example, go through Hubskul province means like a whole territory of Czech Republic in 18 days. And then we'll be having meeting only once with one particular voter group. And that meeting would probably last only 1 or 2 hours. That means he or she has time to sell only 1 or 2 of the policy points from her or his political party's agenda. So every location has different priorities. That's why he or she can visit 25 SOMs in 18 days, but we'll be talking about 25 different things. It's very rare to sell only one agenda throughout all the election campaign in one constituency, but it really depends on the local issues. Usually the local agenda is number one agenda. All election is local. So whatever election it is, there will be local agendas will be discussed first at constituency, and then one of the big national agendas will be discussed. But now, the more and more local population, more and more local people are demanding a cleaner city, cleaner town, and cleaner water and cleaner streets, which is waste management. So this kind of agenda might be quite high in this upcoming election season. But in 2012, when I was running in Hanul district in Ulan Bator, just local people blocked the road and demonstrated and brought the road agenda as a number one agenda to my attention, saying that, okay, young girl, if you're going to run here, fix this road first. We need road because all our agricultural products, all our dishes are getting dusty because of this dust. So if you can't solve the dust problem, we will not elect you. So my agenda immediately changed in 1 hour, and then I said, I will be doing the campaigning for changing your road and road and road. So what I did was, actually, while being in a cabinet for 2 years, I brought up my constituency's road issues so many times that Prime Minister in the end said, okay, we should invest into Ayungera's road. So that's how I got a road in Hanol district to Biokombinat, to Yarmak, to Nisik, to Showo, and to Ultit. And the Hanol, my district, became the most invested. They received the most investment on road for the last few years, just because that was number one agenda in town. So everybody, if local community can mobilize itself to put their own agenda as a number one agenda, it will influence the politics. But I hope many local communities will bring environmental issues very high in their agenda so that all candidates are influenced like I was. Mm-hmm.
Something about a squeaky wheel, but I guess. But I think we were supposed to end this question now. Thank you for that. Are we going to have a break now, a little bit? Yeah, okay. How long? Sorry? 15 minutes, okay. So 4:25, roughly, we'll be back here.